All right, well, welcome everyone to what is our second presentation on the 3 states of awakening to spiritual life, as described in the work Heaven and Hell, numbers 491 to 520. So if you were here for the first presentation, you'll know that we took a high-level overview of the complete map of the awakening from death process. So in this session today, we shift from the overview to the detail. And so we'll be zooming in on the territory of phase 1, which is called the state of external concerns, or the state of exteriors. So the reading for this presentation was Heaven and Hell 491 to 498. So I hope you managed to read through that material in preparation for today. It will be helpful going forward. If you do manage to get a chance, please read the material related to what we're going to be working with. It's just not possible to cover off all the details. So I'll be talking about principles drawn from that material, and if you're familiar with the material, then you will more readily be able to see how the principle is drawn. So understanding these principles and what's offered through the writings, and in particular what we're looking at today, is an invaluable support to your own work of awakening through engaging with the word using the logopraxis approach. So just as a heads up, this material can be difficult as it hones in on core aspects of our identity and opens that up to scrutiny. But what we need to keep in mind is the end in view, which is to make conscious our attachment to what is hellish, so that this can be worked with and replaced with a heavenly sense of self grounded in the Word. So let me begin just by stating that the state of exteriors, like all spiritual processes, is not a state we pass through once and leave behind. It is the first layer we encounter, but it's one we return to again and again at ever-deepening levels. So every time the Word brings a new truth into our awareness and applies it to an aspect of our life that we hadn't examined before, we are most likely going to be back in the work of the first state. So the work of phase 1 is not to destroy the exterior layers, but to make them responsive. That is, to ensure that they faithfully express what is more interior rather than concealing those things within. So I think the subtitle captures the 2 movements of this session. The first being internalizing the word, so taking it from the page into the life of the mind. And the second aspect is dismantling the false self, that is, the persona built up from the loves of self and the world. So these 2 movements are in fact one and the same. If we just think about it, to genuinely internalize the word is to have the false belief in oneself as an autonomous, independent being dismantled. They cannot be separated. So in dealing with this material from Heaven and Hell, the aim is not primarily to gain information about the state of exteriors, but to use the information to recognize the states in ourselves, to see it in our own experience today in our praxis. So we might ask why, to which the following quote from Heaven and Hell provides a response. So Heaven and Hell 492 reads as follows. Man is accustomed from childhood to maintain a semblance of friendship, benevolence, and sincerity, and to conceal the thoughts of his own will, thereby living from habit a moral and civil life in externals, whatever he may be internally. As a result of this habit, man scarcely knows what his interiors are, and gives little thought to them. So this number states why spiritual work with a focus on the life of our minds is a necessary condition for regeneration. The concealment of our inner thoughts through outer behaviours that comply with moral and civil expectations of what constitutes a good person is not just a concealment of things from others, but more devastatingly, it's their concealment from our own awareness. If we didn't know what was needed before the teaching provided here makes it clear in no uncertain terms as to what spiritual awakening entails, and why no secret, motive, or hidden action can be permanently concealed. Ultimately, everything must be brought to light. So consider the following words of the Lord from the Gospels, words you will no doubt be familiar with. Now nothing is covered up which shall not be revealed, and hidden which shall not be known, because whatever you say in the darkness shall be heard in the light, and what you speak in the ear in the storerooms shall be heralded on the housetops. It's from the Gospel of Luke, chapter 12, verses 1 to 3. So the awakening process makes what is hidden known. The inner meaning of the word as spiritual light reveals what is active beneath our natural, everyday level of awareness. So what we see from this particular number from the book of Hebrews, chapter 4, verses 12 to 13, is a statement about the word itself. And this statement highlights what the word is and why it is needed. For the word of God is living and operative and keen above any two-edged sword, and penetrating up to the parting of the soul and spirit, both of the articulations and marrow, and is a judge of the sentiments and thoughts of the heart. And there is not a creature which is not apparent in its sight. Now all is naked and bare to the eyes of him to whom we are accountable. So this making known isn't a disclosure to bring shame or embarrassment, although these emotions may present themselves, but rather it's an act of the Lord's love and mercy. The word only seeks to bring heavenly joy into our lives. So with this in mind, I just want to recap now a few of the key concepts from the first presentation that we just need to hold in mind as we move forward. The Word is the Lord. And this bears repetition because in virtually every other spiritual framework that subscribes to the Bible as its authority, the Word is held to be something separate from the Lord, a helpful pointer toward truth, a narrative that illuminates certain principles, a culturally shaped expression of universal human experience. Now, all of this may be partially true, but in logopraxis, it is insufficient. The word's own claim is both simpler and more demanding. The word, in the form of sacred text, is the Lord, not represents the Lord, not points to the Lord, is the Lord. This is the foundational conviction from which everything in logopraxis flows. It is also the very foundation of the Lord's second advent. The coming or presence of the Lord is through the opening of the word as to its spiritual meaning, or that meaning that makes it possible to apply truths to the life of the mind. So what follows practically from this? If the word is the Lord, then engaging with the word is not simply studying a text. It is the basis for encountering the Lord. And no one can encounter the Lord as the Word and not be changed. In logopraxis, we recognize that the word restructures the minds of those who willingly receive it. This is why John 1:1 grounds everything. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was towards God, and the Word was God. The Word is that which continuously brings all who have been brought into being, not just as a principle, but as the active, creative agent, as the Logos. And that same creative and formative power is at work now in the inner world of our spirit, as we engage with the Word with a view to discerning the quality of our intentions and thoughts. So if you hold the Word as the Lord Himself, rather than as just a useful spiritual text, what has changed in your approach to your practice? This is something to consider. Holding the Word as the Lord sets up conditions in which we can experience the psychoactive properties of the text. So the word psychoactive is clarifying. A psychoactive substance is one that acts directly on the mind, altering its state. In logopraxis, we find that the word does precisely this. But the alteration it produces is not random or distorting. It is formative and clarifying. So coming to the cycle diagram on this slide, when we engage with sacred text with an intent for self-examination and repentance, something begins to happen in our inner world. The word does not remain on the page. It unfolds within the mind. And as it unfolds, it generates the very mental states it describes. For example, when we read about a spirit awakening from death into the spiritual world and then forgetting that they have died, we may suddenly recognize a similar experience in our own awakening. The realization that I do this. I forget that I am a spirit. I am constantly being pulled back into sensory life, treating the natural world as substantial or primary. In those moments, we discover that the text is not describing a future event. It is describing our current state of mind, our experience of the process of spiritual life. This is what the practitioner's note on the slide means. The word doesn't just describe spiritual realities, it creates them within us as we engage with it. This is why the practice of reading, reflecting, and applying the word is not merely educational, but genuinely transformative. And the cycle is self-reinforcing. Each round of engagement opens the inner world more fully, which enables deeper examination, which produces a more genuine encounter, which invites us back to the text with greater receptivity. This is the regenerative spiral in action. The key practical skill that enables this cycle to run is learning to read the word in a particular way. So the ideas contained on this particular slide are perhaps the most practically instructive concepts available to us. It's a skill that describes reading apart from space and time. And as a skill, it's invaluable so far as engaging with the word to arrive at its inner application to our states of mind. So the natural lens shown on the left is the default mode for most people engaging with the word. For example, we read about Moses leading the Israelites through the desert, and we think about ancient Middle Eastern geography and the life of those living in a tribal nomadic culture. Or we read about spirits awakening in the world of spirits, and we think about a future post-mortem event. The calendar and the map are the instruments of this mode of reading. They locate everything in time and space. But a spiritual lens removes these instruments. It says, whatever person is mentioned, whatever place, whatever event, translate this immediately into a question about states of mind. What does this person in the story correspond to in my inner life? What state of consciousness does this landscape represent? What does this event describe happening within the spiritual world of my own mind? So let's look at the removal of natural ideas from one of the paragraphs in the reading that this presentation is focused on. So the paragraph is Heaven and Hell 493. And it states this: the first state of man after death resembles his state in the world, for he is then likewise in externals, having a like face, like speech, and a like disposition, thus a like moral and civil life. So it is that he then does not know but that he is still in the world, unless he gives attention to what he encounters, and to the things told him by the angels when he was resuscitated, that now he is a spirit. Thus is one life continued into the other, and death is merely transition. When Heaven and Hell 493 says that newly arrived spirits forget they have died and believe that they are still living in the world, if we read this naturally, it describes a curious feature of post-mortem experience. If we read it spiritually, it describes a mental state we enter constantly, the state of forgetting that we are spiritual beings, being pulled back into identifying ourselves with our sensory corporeal life. Death, in the spiritual sense, is a state of mind, the state of being dead to spiritual realities. Awakening from death, from this perspective, is not a future event. It is happening now, in this room, as we engage with the Word. So let's take a phrase. So this is the opening phrase. The first state of man after death resembles his state in the world. So if we take this and remove ideas of persons, place, time, we are able to then come to a universal understanding of this statement. And it converts quite clearly into something that is state related. So when we look at those elements in the first statement that are associated with persons, places, or times, and sort of transpose those meanings with something of a spiritual aspect that relates to state, what we have is this: the first state of mind on awakening to spiritual life resembles the natural state of mind prior to awakening to spiritual life. Just take a moment to consider these two statements and ask yourself, do you sense anything different in terms of how they influence your mind as you read them? I don't know if you notice, but when reading in a space-time frame, we find that things being described are held at a distance, whereas the spiritual reading immediately becomes personal in a way that the natural reading cannot be. So concepts framed in terms of space and time place the attention on what is outside of us. But when we lay the elements of natural thought aside, our attention opens inward towards the things belonging to states of mind. By removing the idea of person, man becomes the natural mind. By removing the idea of an event and time, after death becomes awakening. By removing the idea of place, world becomes natural thought immersed in person, place, space, and time. So we'll return to this particular number to unpack it further a little later. For now, having established how we read the word, let's look at where we are in the overall journey. So Heaven and Hell 498 states that everyone there that is in the spiritual world must be an image of his own affection or his own love, and therefore such as he is inwardly, such he must be outwardly. And for this reason, a spirit's exteriors are first disclosed and then reduced to order, that they may serve the interiors as a corresponding plane. We will see why this is the case later, but the principle is that unless the exterior serves as a plane for interiors, what is interior can't be seen. It's vital that interiors are made visible for the processes of regeneration to move forward. Basically, if you are unaware of what needs working on, then you can't work. So this is a central idea that underpins all that's involved in the first phase of awakening to spiritual life. The means by which this is accomplished is the ongoing practice of the word. So Heaven and Hell 492, which we opened with, identifies the core dynamic. Man is accustomed from childhood to maintain a semblance of friendship, benevolence, and sincerity, and to conceal the thoughts of his own will, thereby living from habit a moral and civil life in externals, whatever he may be internally. As a result of this habit, man scarcely knows what his interiors are and gives little thought to them. So we see here the need for an exterior plane within which interior things can be manifested. From childhood, we have been practicing the performance of an outer self, so virtually for our entire lives. The performance is so deeply ingrained that it has become automatic. We have forgotten that it is a performance. In natural social life, we are friendly, we are benevolent, we are sincere. But beneath that exterior, the thoughts of our own will, the actual intentions, the unfiltered affections have been carefully concealed from others and, more importantly, from ourselves. So phase 1 begins to reverse this. Not all at once, but gradually as we look to examine the external plane of the mind where our self-image sits. As we bring the word to bear on our self-image, we begin to see that our interior does not always match our exterior. So anyone who has seriously reflected on the activity of their mental life will recognize the semblance of friendship that conceals occasional contempt, the performance of benevolence that masks moments of self-serving, the sincerity we present that has cracks through which a very different set of intentions can be glimpsed. The self-image we have invested in, the person we believe ourselves to be, is found to be a thin, inauthentic facade. And when that is exposed, it can feel devastating. It is so close to us that its exposure feels like personal failure rather than spiritual opening. The severing of our attachment to this false sense of self is often painful. Yet, this is a gift, not a punishment. The exposure of the false self is not the word condemning us. It is the word working to free us. You cannot be set free from a prison you don't know you're in. This shattering is actually preparation, the shell breaking so that what has been concealed behind it can finally be brought out into the open, and interiors and exteriors can begin to align. The reason this stripping is both necessary and non-negotiable lies in a fundamental spiritual law. So just reading the quote on the slide. In the spiritual world, no one is permitted to think and will in one way and speak and act in another. Everyone there must be an image of his own affection. Such as he is inwardly, such he must be outwardly. It's taken from Heaven and Hell 498. The law of congruence is not a preference, an ideal, or an aspiration. It is a description of how spiritual reality actually operates. In the spiritual world, which is the world of our mind, it is not permitted to maintain a discrepancy between interior and exterior. We are so accustomed to this discrepancy in the natural world that we forget it is the anomaly, not the norm. In natural social life, we maintain exteriors that conceal interiors constantly and necessarily. Politeness, tact, social grace all depend on not saying everything we think. But in the spiritual world, this disassociation is impossible. The exterior must correspond to the interior. So this law has a practical implication that is worth making explicit. The purpose of spiritual practice is not to make our exterior more impressive, more spiritually polished, more consciously good. It is to make our exterior truthful, a genuine expression of what we actually are interiorly. And since our interior at this stage is experienced as the mixed territory of hellish and heavenly loves, the exterior that truthfully reflects it will be mixed as well. That is honest. That is the starting point. The goal is not a performance of spiritual virtue. The goal is genuine correspondence, and that requires, first, an honest reckoning with what the interior actually contains. One of the most disorientating features of Phase 1 is how normal it can all look. So here we return to Heaven and Hell 493, which describes that when spirits first enter the spiritual world, how their external, civil and moral behaviors cover what is internal. And when these spirits enter, life feels continuous with natural life. They don't realize anything has changed. Even though they have been told, they forget that they have died, believing themselves to still be in the world. So how might this relate to our logopraxis experience? So in that number, it talks about how, well, I'll just read the quote. So it is that he then does not know but that he is still in the world, unless he gives attention to what he encounters and the things told him by the angels when he was resuscitated, that now he is a spirit. So you'd think you'd be aware that something had fundamentally changed as to your life, but it appears not. How could that possibly be? Well, if we think of this in terms of our own awakening to spiritual life, we find a pretty accurate mirror. We too frequently forget. When we are in the state of exteriors, the spiritual life feels continuous with natural life. We engage with the Word. We participate in community. We think about our spiritual practice. But the center of gravity of our attention remains in the sensory external world. We constantly forget that real life is interior. We forget that we are spirits in a body, not bodies with a spiritual component. Despite the word's continual reminders, we find ourselves constantly being pulled into the sensual appearances of corporeal life, forgetting that real life is spiritual. And we can see this every time we come back to remembering to attend to our logopraxis task. In the moment of remembering, we realize we had been in a state of forgetfulness, caught up in the world until we remember our work, and then we are reawakened to our spiritual life and praxis once more. So this forgetting is not dramatic. It doesn't feel like a failure. It simply feels normal. We get absorbed in work, in family, in the demands and pleasures of natural life, and the interior dimension recedes. The word becomes, at best, a weekly or bi-weekly activity rather than the organizing principle of every moment. The other reminder spirits receive that they have died occurs when they give attention to the things told them by the angels when they were resuscitated. From the perspective of spiritual praxis, and through the removal of the idea of persons associated with the word angels, we discover that the term angel simply means divine truths from the word that support a life of self-examination and repentance. So those of you who viewed the fishbowl video would have seen the life group working to see how angels could be understood in relation to their experience of the word working in their lives. Divine revelation provides us with divine truths, and logopraxis seeks to keep us in touch with them through encouraging a focus on their application to the life of our minds. The practice of truths opens moments of insight, precisely because it keeps the focus on giving attention to what is encountered, so far as the quality of the thoughts and affections arising in our mental landscape. Logopraxis is designed precisely to interrupt this forgetfulness. The 2-weekly cycle of practice and sharing, the formulation of tasks from truths of the word, the reflection on how the word is working in daily life, these are all structures that repeatedly turn our attention back inward, insisting that the inner life is where our real life is. So the spiritual understanding of how inner life relates to outer life leads to a crucial reframing. So this slide presents us with one of the most psychologically significant principles in the entire series. Heaven and hell are not places spirits travel to. They are direct projections of a spirit's interior state of life. The projection model is shown clearly. The interior state of affections and thoughts inflows from the spiritual world, through the mind, and then is projected outward into the outer sensual plane of the mind. The outer experience, whether it registers as heaven or hell, is the interior being projected onto the sensual plane of awareness. For us in natural life, this means our habitual emotional experience, whether the world feels like a place of warmth and meaning or a place of threat and meaninglessness, reflects the quality of the affections we are living from, not the objective conditions of the world. Two people can experience the same external circumstances as vastly different realities because they are projecting different inner states onto them. This doesn't mean external circumstances are irrelevant. It means they are not causal in the way we assume. The source of our inner life is the quality of the loves and beliefs we hold. What we experience as we engage with external events is a reflection of what's active within. From the point of view of the inner life, the external sensory plane is the means by which we are brought into contact with what's active within. the exterior reveals the interior or brings it into our conscious awareness. By learning to apply truths inwardly, we stop projecting the cause of our emotional states onto external situations, circumstances, or people. We realize our environment is an emanation of our own spiritual associations. Now, this is liberating. If my experience of a relationship is one of constant irritation, the primary question is not, what is wrong with this person, but what state in me does this relationship reveal? The relationship is not the cause of my irritation. It is the canvas on which my inner state is made visible. And inner states can be worked with. Canvases cannot. So in phase 1, we also encounter the role of spiritual friends, those initial concepts and beliefs we relied on at the beginning of our journey. This meeting of friends is found in Heaven and Hell 494 and 495, and this quote describes what the role of these friends is. Their friends tell them about the conditions of eternal life and take them about to various places and into various companies and sometimes into cities and into gardens and parks, showing them chiefly such magnificent things as delight the externals in which they are. They are then brought in turn into those notions about the state of their soul after death and about heaven and hell that they had entertained in the life of the body. Nearly all are anxious to know whether they will get to heaven. This last statement, nearly all are anxious to know whether they will get to heaven. This clearly becomes a critical question for people as they begin to turn inward, to do reflective interior work. Because as the outer civil and moral facade begins to break down, they begin to see what is of hell within. So a natural reading of this description places the focus on our relationships with other people, spouses, friends, relatives. A spiritual reading presents us with the relationships we have with concepts and beliefs we have trusted in for our life. On the left of the diagram are the embodied relationships, the people whose presence has shaped us for better or worse. In the spiritual world, newly arrived spirits are greeted by those they knew and loved in the world. This reunion serves a purpose. It processes the affectional ties that have been formed. On the right of the diagram, the spiritual idea of friends relates to the internalized concepts, thought structures, beliefs we find comforting or useful as a means of navigating life. These conceptual friends form the basis for the exploration of the places, that is, states, and companies, relationships, and cities, doctrines or beliefs, and gardens, intellectual things that flower within the mind. All these things have their correspondences. They belong to the inner world of the mind, the spiritual world. The concepts and frameworks we bring to spiritual life may be sensually or naturally orientated, rooted in a historical or persuasive faith, drawn from other traditions, or even opposed to the deeper perspectives the Word offers. Whatever their quality, they are where we start, and they are enough to begin. We can only begin to examine and explore our inner world from the established conceptual framework we have developed over the course of our lives. And that's okay. These conceptual friends serve a genuine important function at this stage, even if they are not perfect, even if they contain error. The critical point is this: these friends must be honoured. We must not rush to displace them or to correct them too aggressively. This is something to be aware of in Logopraxis group life and how we companion with others, as it is to us personally. The concepts we relied on at the beginning of our journey served a real purpose. They can be trusted to serve their function in the right season. So we need to understand that phase 1 involves genuine suffering. The stripping of the exterior self-image is not comfortable. The discovery that we are not who we thought we were is destabilizing. The exposure of false friends, the concepts we relied on that turned out to be inadequate. All of this is disconcerting. And the natural, compassionate instinct, both in ourselves and in those who accompany us, is to alleviate the suffering. But the practitioner's note here is explicit. Interventions that seek to correct the thinking or beliefs of someone in this state risk doing more harm than good. Those friends, however imperfect, however inadequate they may appear to be, are still serving a crucial function. They are the scaffolding within which the person can process their current state. To remove the scaffolding before the building can support itself is to risk collapse. This is a critical point to remember in Logopraxis group life. It means sitting with people in their struggle without rushing to fix things. It means trusting the word's ability to guide the process without our intervention. It means in the Logopraxis community not being quick to correct or redirect, but rather to bear witness, to accompany, and to hold the space with the hands open, not closed. For ourselves, it means resisting the impulse to make our own spiritual struggle more comfortable than it needs to be. Not seeking escape routes from genuine spiritual processes. Not dulling the sharpness of the word's light with reassurances that paper over what the light is genuinely revealing. The assurance is this: the Lord is the one managing all this. Every state that arises through genuine engagement with the Word is under His providence. The process that feels uncomfortable is most likely the one that is working. So the next slide just gives us a bit of a translation summary for reading the word spiritually, drawing on what we have covered so far. So it acts as a kind of translation key. If you come to the first row, headed death, death naturally is what happens at the end of biological life. A future event, external, something often sought to be avoided. Spiritual death, however, is a present state, the state of being dead to spiritual realities. We are in this state whenever we forget the inner life, whenever we are absorbed entirely in sensory and corporeal existence. Awakening from death is not a post-mortem event. It is what happens each time we turn our attention inward and recognize something of our true spiritual state. The next row, heaven and hell. Naturally, these places are places we go to after we die, destinations determined by our moral conduct. Spiritually, they are present, active states of mind projected outward as our experience of reality. Heaven is the state of a mind organized around the love for the Lord and towards the neighbor. Hell is the state of a mind organized around the love of self and the love of the world. And we move between approximations of both in the course of a single day. The idea of friends. Naturally, the friends who greet arriving spirits in heaven and hell 494 are deceased relatives and acquaintances. Spiritually, they are the concepts, beliefs, and frameworks of historical faith that we have internalized, the spiritual companions that feel familiar and trustworthy at this stage of our journey. Goodness. Naturally, goodness is outer moral and civil behaviour, helping others, following rules, being civil. Spiritually, goodness is the inner quality of the intentions and loves from which our actions proceed. The good and the evil can perform identical outward acts. What differs is the love that motivates them. So one of the most challenging revelations of phase 1 is the discovery that outer goodness, or a show of outer goodness, is not enough. So the iceberg is a useful image for looking at the fallacy of external goodness. Two icebergs look identical above the waterline, both attending worship, both behaving morally, both performing civic duties. The difference is entirely beneath the surface, in the inner engine that drives the outer behaviour. Heaven and Hell 495 identifies the specific error. Spirits in the state of exteriors believe that outer conduct is what qualifies them for heaven. They have lived decent, orderly, religious lives, and they are convinced that this is sufficient. What they have not grasped is that both the good and the evil can perform identical outward acts. What matters is the love from which those acts proceed. So the quote at the bottom of the slide is particularly striking. And even when taught, they fail to comprehend that thinking and willing are of any avail, but only speaking and acting. It's from Heaven and Hell 495. And this is the hallmark of phase 1. Even when the principle that interior life matters is explained clearly, the mind in phase 1 cannot fully assimilate it, because the exterior sense of self is still held to be primary, and the exterior action is what seems substantial. So this is not a criticism of this experience. It is simply a description of what the process entails. The failure to grasp the primacy of the interior is not willful ignorance. It is the state of the mind at this level of development. It is precisely what phase 1 is designed to work on. The deep conviction that inner life, that is, the thoughts, affections, intents of the heart, is what really matters, is not an intellectual proposition, but it is a lived reality, and it takes time to form. And it forms through the repeated experience of the Word exposing interior states and carrying us through them. This is what builds trust in the Word. As phase 1 progresses, the Word functions as an active agent of examination. This is like the good spirits who examine new arrivals into the spiritual world. Heaven and Hell 496 describes an interesting feature of the state of exteriors. Good spirits examine the newly arrived to discover their true nature. In the first state, both good and evil spirits can utter truths and do good acts. The exterior still masks the interior. So the examination probes more deeply. What is it they attend to? Where do they turn when left entirely to themselves? This is a beautiful image for what the practice of self-examination does. The truths of the Word, when worked with sincerely, function as those good spirits. They examine us. They probe beneath the moral exterior, manifesting in our awareness as questions like, what love or affection is active here? What do I turn toward when no one is watching? What is the quality of my interior thought when I'm alone? The key to assess one's state, taken from Heaven and Hell 496, is what one attends to eagerly. When hellish proprial states predominate, it is exterior matters involving position, reputation, news, jobs, self-serving plans. These things, they are all attended to with keen attention. In this state, spiritual and interior matters are glossed over. On the other hand, when it is a genuine spiritual state that is active, attention is drawn to interior things, the quality of the thoughts and affections arising in the mental landscape, looking to the Word, to the Lord, practicing self-examination and repentance, and the shunning of evils as sins against the Lord. It can be a challenging question to ask ourselves, but when we have free, uncommitted time, what does our attention instinctively move toward? When we are alone with our thoughts, what dominates? This movement reveals more about where we are in the process than any deliberate spiritual activity we might perform. The beam of light passing through the geometric brain in the image is truth examining the mind, not to condemn, but to clarify, to show us where we actually are, so that the work can proceed from an honest foundation. And where does phase 1 ultimately lead? The core work of phase 1, the state of exteriors, is the intense struggle to realize that it's the inner life, what we intend and think, and not outward behavior that is primary. Through engaging with truths of the Word, the external masks we rely on to maintain our self-image are dismantled, and what they concealed can be brought into the light of truths that penetrate further in. The inward pivot is the culmination of phase 1's work, a shift in the center of gravity from one's spiritual life from the outer to the inner. From this point, it is the quality of the love that's driving the interior state that is most important. The sequence on this slide, illuminating the core, confronting the proprium, the act of metanoia, points towards where this pivot leads. So that will be our focus of the next session, but for now it serves as a horizon. This is the territory phase 1 has been preparing us to enter. The following Logopraxis aphorism speaks to this condition. So while you may seek a shortcut, understand that the Lord already has you on the shortest route possible. In the work Divine Providence 145, it names what's at stake. The Lord brings us out of that hellish freedom that is really slavery and into the heavenly freedom that is truly, inherently free. What we experience as freedom in the exterior, acting from self-love's impulses, maintaining the semblance of goodness without the substance, is actually bondage. True freedom is the fruit of the struggle phase 1 demands. So phase 1 is not a low-level spiritual experience. It is the necessary, dignified, and often profoundly challenging beginning of the journey inward. Those who find it difficult are not failing, they are working.